Hey everyone, and welcome to Read This Now, the weekly webcast where Brad Gustafson and I share two books that we love and we think you should read when, Brad?
In a timely manner.
Yes, right now.
Right
or
now,
as
sorry.
soon as you can, whatever. It sounds really forceful, but it's really just a suggestion.
It's a strong suggestion.
Exactly. How are you, my friend?
Things are really good. The sun is shining in Minnesota, and after like our 9-month winter, it's welcomed by most people. So
I love it. You guys earn the sunshine there.
yeah, and I love the background. It almost looks green screen. It's so profesh. What do you got going there?
This is just my living room. This
All
is
right.
the reaction to poor internet reception upstairs that I've recently been getting. So I've just been trying to move around the house in the hopes that it fixes it a bit.
See, Jen, even your plan B is better than most people's plan A. That's all I'm
You're
gonna say.
silly. You are silly. So what do you want to talk about this week?
Say that again.
What do you want to talk about this week?
Okay. So slight behind the scenes confession for all of our myriads of viewers. Last week, Jen and I got into this conversation. And I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. You were probably like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he doesn't know this stuff. And then I forget, we had some tech issue and it's like, oh my gosh, that was so good. And I was personally kind of feeling like I learned a lot. And the principal colleagues that I know, I feel like maybe they're wrestling with some of the same things I am. So I'm gonna hope lightning strikes twice here, Jen. And I can't believe I'm doing this because I was nervous last week about doing this, but it's not that I want to talk necessarily about the reading wars. It's not that I don't want to talk about them, but I at least want to be bold enough to ask a few questions for my own learning and then think, I can't help but think other people might be wondering or join the conversation even. Maybe this is just the beginning of a convo. So we got news for you people. I don't think we have 2 books to share this week, but maybe this conversation will make up for it. Does that sound okay?
It sounds perfect. And
Okay.
I'm excited to have the chance to do it again. I'm sure that our 3.5 viewers, most of whom, probably 2.5 of them are educators. The other is your mom, I'm sure. And but they will empathize with our technical difficulties last week.
Yeah.
And so we're knocking on wood that we don't have
It's a
that this
thing.
week.
It happens. So, and it kind of started last week. I book talked a decodable reader, if you've heard of these things. And it's not that I will never do that again, right? I'm sure that I will. But that kind of spurred our conversation. So the thing that I kind of wanted to lean into again is this concept. Here's what I'm noticing in the literacy world. There appear to be kind of sort of 2 really heated sides, for lack of a better word. One is talking a lot about loving reading and motivation, 2 things that I find immense value and importance in and try to be cognizant of in my decision making. And then another side that I'm hearing talks a lot about phonics and teaching reading skills. And the thing that I struggle with as a novice or just a leader who's trying to figure it all out and serve kids the best I can is I see value in both and probably maybe even for different kids at different times, but why does it have to be either or? Like, why is there even a reading war? I probably framed that really horribly, but can you make sense of anything I just asked, Jen? Salvage this beginning of a combo?
Sure. So first of all, my information literacy hat has just flown off of the hat shelf and onto my head. You can't see it, it's invisible. But something you said made me want to bring up some information I think is important when we start talking about things like reading wars or things like that, is that, when you talk to educators, if you ask educators what platform they use, in terms of being connected to other educators and for professional learning, a lot of them are going to say Twitter. Some will say Facebook or some combination of that. But really, it boils down to just a couple. And when you spend time in those places and you see passions shared and expressed loudly over those in those feeds and over those lines, so to speak, it's easy to feel like this is how a majority of people feel because those messages are amplified in those spaces. But it's important to remember that really only, and this, I'm not making this number up, only about 28% of people, period, are on a platform like
Hmm.
Twitter, for example. I'm going to use Twitter as an example. 28% of adults use Twitter. And so, of that 28% of adults, a smaller fraction of them are educators, and a smaller fraction of them are the ones that we follow. So, even though these topics may be really inflamed and spoken about passionately in our feeds, and it doesn't mean that we should ignore them, but we should also put them in perspective, because sometimes the loudest voices don't always mean the majority of thinking. You have to just remember that. Sometimes it feels like the whole world is shouting about a thing, and really, well, it's only just the people we happen to be following in these spaces. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It begs another question.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't help but wonder and ask, what about even if it's a smaller percentage of people who are asking or thinking a certain way, like they matter. So then how
Of
do we still
course.
navigate these waters?
Sure. So of course, these questions matter. The conversations there matter. They certainly influence us as practitioners. I think it's important for us to not feel pressured by those conversations and thinking that this is the way the whole world is going,
Hmm.
and so therefore I should go along. Like, I
Sure.
just feel like we have to put those things in perspective, especially when we talk about things that are called like wars, like the reading
Yeah.
wars and things like that. You want to just, because really, I think for vast majorities of teachers who are just closing their classroom doors, either virtually or physically, they don't know anything about a reading war. They're just trying to do good work for kids. So just important I think, to frame
Hmm.
those things in terms of where they really belong in our consciousness. But
I'm
all of
glad you
that
said
said,
that, because I did find myself kind of asking myself, well, what side of the war should I be on? And then doing research, almost trying to figure where I aligned. And I've done a lot reading, quote unquote, both sides. And part of, I mean, I see value in important research and things for kids and specific kids, in both sides. So I don't know that I can subscribe to a camp yet.
so here's my view on that, is that, I feel like I want to be on the reader's side,
Hmm.
that I want to focus on what's best for the reader in front of me. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some practices that we can apply in a more global way, because we know that for a large swath of kids, those are useful. But I think the more that we can try to individualize, reading and instruction in general for kids, the more likely we are to really not only be successful in helping them master skills, but also develop those dispositions and habits that make them curious, empathetic, learners and readers for the rest of their lives. So when we're talking about the two sides of the reading debate, it's, for me, it becomes a matter of thinking about the kiddo in front of me and what they specifically need. Some kids need more access to decodable readers, like you shared with me last week, and some kids do not. They're ready to move on from those things. It's when we apply decodable readers to everyone based on, say, data, from a benchmark assessment, et cetera, that we get into trouble. That I think that numeric data is one piece of the puzzle, but talking to kiddos, getting to know them, understanding their interests, what kinds of books they might most likely fall in love with or might be a touchstone for them, those have to be a piece of the puzzle. I personally feel like in school, because of our obsession with testing as a country, as a country, we are obsessed with standardized testing. And that, to me, has put the focus a little too heavily on the reading rather than on the reader. And when I go into schools that are focused on readers, those look very different than schools that are focused on reading.
When you
And
said that earlier, Jen, that to me was a mic drop moment. Like, I literally thought I should throw my headset down. It was so powerful. Can you give any other examples of what, like when you go into schools or just in your reading, what it looks like when schools are focusing on the readers Because I believe that would resonate with other principals too.
Sure. So I'm going to paint very generally right now. And I don't want anyone watching this to feel like if they think, oh, I'm doing that thing, that they're somehow doing something wrong. Context matters. Everything about your school and your school climate can influence the way something is done. But I walk into schools that are reading focused, in which there's a lot of surface level performative efforts to emphasize reading. Things like, I'm gonna call out the example of like a read poster in the library, in which teachers are just holding up a book, which they may or may not have ever read, but they are putting that picture up to show, hey, reading's important. Schools where every teacher is tasked with making sure that kids do some kind of reading assessment in their classes, etc. These are reading focused schools. I've been in schools, and it's like it pains me to think about this, but I've been in schools where kids are only allowed to check out books that fall under a certain reading level in both their classroom or their school libraries, because that's where they tested. They're not even allowed. I've been in schools where kids are not even allowed to peruse shelves where the book is not on their designated level. I've talked to those kids at the circulation desk and asked them questions like, oh, what are you checking out? Why? And their answer is, oh, it's the only book with the orange dot I haven't read already. That I don't think is the outcome we're looking for. Schools that are focused on readers look a little bit different, in my view. Schools that are focused on readers have books everywhere. We're talking about classrooms and libraries that are full of books, principals' offices that are full of books that the teachers, the librarians, the principals have actually read, places where reading is celebrated as opposed to reading achievement, or not just reading achievement. We don't just have a celebration when our school achieves a certain level on the reading assessment. We have celebrations around reading and around books of all different types and stripes, where we walk up to a teacher and ask them what they're reading, and they have an answer. Places where kids and families and adults in the building are engaged in book clubs and other literacy activities that not only re-emphasize and give kids the opportunity to practice the kind of skills they're learning in the classroom during instruction, but also center reading as a joyful, relevant part of the human experience.
I love that.
Go ahead.
And what I would add to that, just from the learning I've been doing, is everything you said, and a school that has books that are accessible to all kids, which could include decodable readers, as big a variety as we can do with that. And also, and again, this is my view right now, however formative it might be, reading instruction and intervention support that provides kids the solid phonics base, so that they actually have a chance at decoding a text and one day falling in love with Coyote Sunrise, or all the books that we're talking about that just getting to that, or assuming that jump will happen, or that it should happen out of love alone, doesn't work for all kids. And that's kind of what I'm learning right now.
I think too, there's people who love reading sometimes, and again, this is such a generalization, but I think sometimes we forget that maybe kids don't have. Let me back this up and say that you as the principal, me as the librarian, the classroom teacher, you have to assume that you are the only, or perhaps even the first person who has modeled what it means to possess a joyful reading life for a kid. We can't assume that kids come to school having been read to, having a bookshelf of books at home, having ever owned their own book. We can't assume those things. And for those kids especially, and also for other kids for whom reading might just be a challenge, or even just having the attention, the the ability to just sit with a text for a long time, those things might be a challenge. Those kids need scaffolds to get to the point where they can connect with a book in an emotional way, in a way that makes it a touchstone. The decodable readers, the instruction that teachers do expertly in their classrooms every day, all of those are the scaffolds that get those kids to that independence and to access. But independence and access have to be the goal. Unfettered access and independence has to be the goal, rather than, I think sometimes we overemphasize achievement within a scaffolded lane as opposed to remembering what the ultimate destination is. So, and I don't fault anyone for that emphasis. Schools are a high pressured environment, both for kids and for teachers. And perhaps this last year more so than ever, stakes are high for schools to perform in certain ways. And I understand the urge to sort of tailor everything towards those achievement goals. But what I think is important to remember is that one thing informs and fuels the other. Kids being able to decode and master vocabulary and read fluently helps them get to independent reading, but independent reading also helps to fuel the motivation and the dispositions and the attitudes that kids have towards reading tasks, especially when they get challenging.
Yeah, it's like a symbiotic relationship between motivation and the skill of reading, even from the emergent or developing reader phase. This is how I look at it, like a school's culture and our attitudes and behaviors and modeling of reading, celebrating it, can feed into that and have positive impact, even as kids are learning some of those basic building blocks to,
Right.
all the things, right? But certainly later on in life too, as they do become more independent readers. I wrote down something quick that when you said we can't assume, I thought, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't assume, but we can help ensure that happens. And I actually think we have a responsibility to help ensure it happens, certainly an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, we all look at the world through our own bubble. And sometimes, even though we know intrinsically that not all of our kiddos have the same life experience, and we understand that kids come to us with all sorts of different challenges and with assets, they come to us with all different experiences. Sometimes I think when we're planning instruction, it's just really good to press pause and to think about that and figure out in what ways am I able to individualize this for the kid, rather than looking at this like, oh, are you saying I'm supposed to provide individualized instruction for all 112 kids that I teach? Because obviously that's not feasible in our modern classroom environment. But to press pause and think, what do I know about these readers? And in what ways can I try to individualize for specific readers who really have the highest need? I don't think you can go wrong. And as you plan instruction that does standardize in some ways out of necessity, and because the majority of your kids will have similar needs, as you see kids not responding to that instruction, then that's when they are identified as kiddos who maybe need extra scaffolds or more freedom. Like just there's the prescription for what they might need as a reader depends on them.
Yeah, I think that last part was really key. So I'm glad that you shared that. Well, as always, Jen, I feel like even when we're talking about specific book titles, I'm always learning. And actually, a lot of our shows over the years have dovetailed into conversations kind of like this one. This one, we just so happen to kind of create more of a protected space just to have it. Anything else you want to share before we go enjoy the sunny Minnesota weather?
I have a semi-sunny day in the Pacific Northwest. I was looking out the window, but I'll take it. Just to say that I think that kids who have adults in their lives who care deeply and passionately about them becoming readers are the luckiest kids in the world. So when we come along people who maybe have different views about how to get kids there to that independence, to be independent, joyful readers, when we meet people who have different views about how to achieve that, the important thing is to remember that we kind of all want the same thing. And if we can think about that as our shared goal, we all want kids to be readers, then surely we can figure out ways to give kids access to the best of what all people in this, I don't want to say argument, but all people in this work have to offer.
I always appreciate whether it's a parent advocating or just someone presenting information that's different than what I knew or what I thought. I try to learn a lot from it because it's just fascinating and it's worth learning and trying to enhance my thinking on it. The last thing I just want to piggyback on what you said. I think it's reasonable to assume there are some kids who don't have the same level of advocacy as some of their classmates. And for that reason, it's also really important and a lot of times during these conversations, I'm thinking of my principal I'm thinking about myself and my students, but also principal friends, right? Who are also leading, who I talk to. And I think that's why it's so important that we also keep those kiddos in mind so that we're creating cultures and systems that are meeting each reader's needs, just like you talked about the last 10 minutes or so, because it doesn't, and as I'm learning, it shouldn't have to rely on one person or group's advocacy. Like, we got to get this figured out in case that advocacy isn't there. And that's a great opportunity and responsibility we have. And I think it's really important, exciting work. I'm glad that you are here and have been through the years to help me lean into it differently and better.
Well, I'm glad that we have the ability to just have these conversations as two people who are still learning, who have experience to bring to the table, but who are also open to learning more and to have their thinking stretched on the subject. I certainly don't know everything there is to know about literacy, and I love learning from people who have different experiences from me. So if we're open to that, the one non-negotiable for me, which is I think I'll say just to wrap this up.
I feel like this is going to be good.
Well, it's just that I think the one non-negotiable is that if you feel like part of your core mission is to help kids become readers, then you must be a reader yourself. And I think whether or not you're focused on scaffolding the reading skill for kids, or you are focused on helping kids become independent readers who can self-select books that make a difference for them as a human being, you must be a reader. If that's even part of your core mission, then you have to prioritize that in your life. Even Brad and I read a book each week so that we can talk about them here. We also read other books because we want to, because reading brings joy to us. But you don't have to compare yourself as a reader to anyone else. You don't have to look at how much Brad or I might read or other people online in your PLN and think, oh, I don't read enough because I'm not reading at the same volume they are. What you have to do is find ways to prioritize reading in your own life, in your own schedule, so that you have not only books to share with kids, but also so that you're able to model for them what it looks like to be a reader. It's one thing to be able to tell somebody that something's really important. It's another thing to be able to show them through your lived experience. So
I couldn't agree more, Jen. Couldn't agree more. And just to add to that, because we're always such a great team, I think, like having a live, active relationship with reading is the one of the most important things I can do as a literacy leader. In part, not just because of being able to have conversations with books and being more skilled and equipped to be able to connect a kiddo to a book that they might fall in love with, or connect a teacher, or just support in a way that is meaningful. But it's also because then I can relate and have empathy for why it's hard to read sometimes and what gets in the way, and meet a teacher and a kiddo where they're at when they're struggling and have that conversation too. It's like a living, active, authentic thing. And before I read a lot, and before, back when I knew how to read as a principal, but really was maybe only reading PD books, and no judgment to people who are doing that, but that was just a different level of engagement for me with the readers in our school. And now my world has been transformed. And in part, it's just by being part of a community of other people who also prioritize reading.
Mm-hmm. I remember when we first started this show, Brad and I literally conceived of this little webcast because we got questions from people about how to do a book talk. And for me, it was just a matter of modeling and showing in an authentic way that you don't need anything fancy. You don't need production values or props. Those things are fun and wonderful if you want to have them from time to time, but they're not a requirement. What you just need is to be a reader and to be willing to share not only that book, but that experience with others. That's it. That's literally all you need. And I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had with people who reach out to me about our little show and who maybe don't put it in those exact words, but who will say to me that this show, and just let me back that up and say, not this show, but that being a reader not only help them develop a toolbox, an arsenal full of books to share with kids, but also help them have conversations with kids about a reading life that's authentic. And that includes stumbling blocks, that includes pauses where don't feel motivated to read, that includes abandoning books sometimes when you're 20 pages in and it's just not for you, but also includes picking up a book because someone recommended it, or picking up a book because the cover was cool, or picking up a book for any other reason.
Because a friend talked about it, right?
Yes, yes.
I've lived that out week after week.
Yes, and that's an important part of being reader focused, because you're not just showing kids how to read, you're showing them how to live a reader's life. And so you can only do that when you're a reader. And that's why I love this little show and our 3.5 viewers, because we get to do that each week selfishly for each other. I love hearing you talk about a book each week. And I love it when people reach out to us and say, hey, I read that book because y'all talked about it. It's a joyful thing.
And I got a great one for next week. I can hardly wait. So.
Me too. Me too. So next week we will resume our regularly scheduled program, but thank you for indulging us in this conversation this week. I enjoyed it. I hope you did. And Brad, if people want to go back and look at some of our book talks from the past as they wait anxiously for 2 book talks next week, where can they go?
Just head on over to bit.ly/read_this_now. And there's a whole lot of books that you should probably read right now.
Yes. Yay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Until next week, happy reading.